Good deal. Well, it's kind of funny because Brian Smith had said to me, "You seem kind of proud of your Marines." You're damn right I am. These are some of the finest young men and women that I've ever been associated with, other than my first time with the guys on the Brook. And that makes this special for me too, because I talk to a lot of people that come through here, but it's special to be able to talk to the Brook family. And like I said, what you're looking at here is an accident. This museum is kind of like the same thing that Steve and I did back in 2001. We sat around and said, you know, wouldn't it be neat to get some of the Brook guys together? And in 1996, myself and the CO were sitting in his office having a cup of coffee, and he goes, you know, do you think we could build a museum using that old Quonset hut? And that was all the guidance he had given me. I found 40 Marines, and within 6 months we had something similar to this, and we opened it up on Memorial Day of 1996. So we've been in operation for 14 years. When I say operation, it's kind of interesting because we're not funded by anybody. We basically find what falls off the truck. We take donations in material. We don't really take monetary donations unless you drink a lot of beer. But we will build this from whatever we find. And what you're looking at is the only place in the world where you're going to see 5 in this building, the 6 tractors over at our training ramp, the 6 amphibious tractors that were used from Guadalcanal through the Incheon landing in Korea. And they go clockwise, the LBT-1, and there's no quiz on this, the original Alligator, the LBT-1. There's 3 others besides this left in the world. This is the very first one, the LBT-2 Water Buffalo, the A-1, the LBT-4, the LBT-3 Bushmaster, and then the A-5. And the reason it's not in here is that when they made the movie Flags of Our Fathers, Warner Brothers came and leased that tractor for us. So if you ever see Flags of Our Fathers, you see that amphibious tractor with the howitzer on the front of it firing a shot. That only cost $250,000 for Warner Brothers to rent that from us for a while. And so while that vehicle was out of here, we had plenty of time and way too much time on our hands, so we built a bar. And then we told them, well, we can't put it back in here, so we said, oh, we'll find another place for that, we'll use this for a bar. But this is a training tool for us too. Like I mentioned earlier, we train 1,000 of these young Marines a year through here. They don't ever start a class until they come in here and suffer through the old guy telling them about Tarawa, Iwo, Peleliu, Tinian, Saipan. Somehow, by default, I became sort of a de facto historian, and that's how I got involved with this museum. And so it's been a labor of love for me, and I think after I retire from civil service in a couple of years, I'll probably come back here and continue doing this just as a volunteer, because I've had the absolute privilege, the honor to meet the young men that took these vehicles ashore at those battles in the Pacific over the last 14 years. And I've learned that great deeds are soon forgotten when not retold. And when these guys are passing away, and I get a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old high school sophomore, I said, there's a reason why you can wear that thing in your ear and you can wear your pants down to the bottom of your ass. It's because that 17, 18-year-old Marine had the courage to go into the fire of Tarawa, of Peleliu, of Iwo. I can go through the whole litany of islands. But I try to drive home to them the importance of what they're seeing here and what it means to why they can do what they do today. All right, that being said, what you're looking at here, again, this is an accident. This was never supposed to be a vehicle of war. The LBT-1 Alligator originally started its life as a duck and alligator hunting vehicle in the swamps and Everglades of Florida. A gentleman by the name of Donald Roebling. Folks in Jersey probably know that name. The Roebling family built the Brooklyn Bridge. Donald Roebling was the grandson of the builder of the Brooklyn Bridge. And in the early 1930s, there was this massive series of hurricanes that went through the Florida Panhandle and through the Everglades. Significant loss of life. They couldn't get back into the swamps in the Everglades to rescue the survivors. So Roebling was pushed by his dad, who was the son of the bridge builder. Why don't you, you're a tinkerer, you're an inventor, you've got a lot of time in your hands, why don't you develop a rescue vehicle? So with that mandate, the younger Roebling designed a vehicle that looked similar to this, and the vehicle, for the lack of a better name, he called it the Alligator because it was amphibian. And he was going to use it as a rescue vehicle, but he penned out the numbers. He says, I got X number of tourists that come down from the north during the winter, I got X number of hurricanes. This is a money-making proposition. I'm going to take them on tours in the swamps and the Everglades to hunt ducks and alligators. And that's where it would have ended, except in 1937, Life magazine, needing a little filler, did a 4-picture article on Roebling's alligator, and we consider that to be the birth of the amphibious tractor arm of the United States Marine Corps. So I have to take you back a little bit. In 1921, military planners knew that we were going to face Japan. It was a foregone conclusion. At the end of World War I, the Japanese, being on the winning side at that time, were mandated islands across the Pacific. They had the Gilberts, the Solomons, the Marianas. That was part of the spoils of war. The Japanese, even in 1921, understood that their resources were dwindling. They were going to have to either trade or take by force these resources. Trade didn't work, so they went into Manchuria. They went into China. They started moving into Burma. They started moving out and expanding, and the Japanese knew that the only force on the planet in those days to stop them would have been the United States of America. So the Japanese fortified these islands throughout the Pacific, and when you look at a battle map of the Pacific in 1942, the islands basically formed a wall. And it was similar to the French Maginot Line, which the French thought were going to stop the German hordes coming from the east. Japanese had that same concept when they built and they fortified these islands. And they were such obscure names. Tarawa, Baishio, names that meant nothing to anyone. But to the Japanese, it was basically fortified airstrips to which they could project their own air power against the United States Navy's carrier forces. The Japanese took a preemptive step. We know it as December 7th, 1941. They wanted to take that carrier force out. Their G2 or intelligence was a little bit screwed up. They didn't realize that the carriers weren't there, and as history says, they missed them. And that was a golden opportunity because we survived that and we started to march forward. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself because when Roebling designed this vehicle, the Marine Corps in 1937 was still rowing guys ashore. Their means of amphibious assault was either to use a motor launch or wade ashore, get their ships in as close as possible. They knew that the Japanese islands were coral-surrounded atolls, and the only way you could assault an island like that was wait for the tidal conditions to be right. So they had a dilemma. The defenders get a significant advantage when the tide's in their favor. So it just so happened that a Navy admiral is thumbing through a Life magazine and he sees Roebling's article on the alligator and he goes, hey, this may be the solution to our problem of getting onto these coral-surrounded atolls. They go down and they talk with Roebling, and Roebling says, well, yeah, I've got one of these. They said, let's test it. The Marine Corps tested it, and they said, well, great, this is what we want, build them. Roebling says, only build one. Now, if you're from Florida, like Doc Gale is, Doc, you know where Dunedin is, and Clearwater, and that whole area? Where are you, Doc? You know that area around Tampa? Roebling had an estate down there. Like I say, Roebling was an incredibly wealthy man. He didn't really have to do this, but he had a lot of time in his hands, and he liked to tinker. Roebling built 9 different variations of his first alligator and tested them in his swimming pool in his backyard. Now, I've been to Dunedin, Florida. I've been to the Roebling estate, and I've stood at that swimming pool, and I realized this is where the amphibious tractor was born, in this damn swimming pool. And when Roebling built it and tested it, and he found one that worked, and the Marine said, let's build it. He went, I can't build them. I don't have manufacturing capabilities. So he said, well, who in the area does it? And there was a company called FMC, Food Machinery Corporation in Lakeland, Florida. Their claim to fame was they built refrigerators. And by default, they get the contract to build an amphibious tractor because they had the only assembly line, which is about as long as this building, for refrigerators. And what they ended up doing was they said, okay, we'll build your tractors. On July the 1st, 1941, the first LVT-1, Liars, Vandals, and Thieves, Large Vulnerable Target, Landing Vehicle Track, rolls off the assembly line. 5 months later, the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor. There are 9 amphibious tractors in existence in the United States Marine Corps. And at that moment, they said, first stop, Solomons. We're going to Guadalcanal. Because their plan was to come up from 2 sides and move in toward the Japanese home islands. In 1942, at Guadalcanal, these vehicles were used for the first time in the history of warfare. The interesting part about it was the Marines looked at this thing as a logistics vehicle at first. And the reason they looked at it as a logistics vehicle is, again, it did 5 miles an hour in the water, it could carry 17 Marines in the back, but this was their problem. That's the thickness of a fender on a 37 Packard, let alone an armored vehicle. And a 7.7 mil out of a Japanese Nambu machine gun will perforate that like toilet paper. And the Marines needed more armor on it, so they said, well, we'll put these in the second and subsequent waves. And what we'll do is we'll use them as logistics vehicles to bring in supplies and take the wounded back out to the ships. So when they hit Guadalcanal in 42, these vehicles came in the third and fourth waves. And if you perchance have seen the HBO series Pacific, there was a couple of shots because one of the side things, and I digress for a moment, the museum is the only source of information and live vehicles that were used in World War II. So I've worked with the people that did Windtalkers, Flags of Our Fathers, Pacific. They come here, they take photos, they get data, they get information, and we as a museum get a little tiny credit on the bottom of there that keeps talking about the history of the Amtrak. So anyway, at Guadalcanal, when they used these things, they found out that they worked exactly how they hoped they would. They could crawl over palms, rolling up palm stumps. They moved over coral. They moved through sand. Again, adapt, improvise, overcome. The Marines are very, very adaptive lads. These were used as bridge pontoons in rivers. You could take two of them, turn them sideways like planking over them. You could move troops, machinery across the riverbed because you had instant bridge pontoons. So it was a versatile vehicle. Marines go back to Roman and go, we want these to be in the first wave. We want these to be the frontline assault vehicles. And Roman goes, okay, let's go back to FMC. Build me something bigger and stronger. So FMC designs this vehicle, or the LVT-2, which was known as the Water Buffalo. And the Water Buffalo was a change. This was 16,000 pounds. They added 10,000 pounds, put some armor on it. They went away from an inline 6-cylinder gasoline engine to a 7-cylinder Continental radial aircraft engine, and we got those engines in the back in the corner. And drive shaft, engine was here, drive shaft right down the middle of the troop compartment with a cowling over it to protect the infantry inside. Tranny in the front, driver, assistant driver, 2 machine gunners, and a radio operator. Crew of 5 on vehicles. All right, Tarawa. This is where the Marine legacy of amphibious tractors makes its mark in the world. Tarawa, and when I would talk with educators that come through there, after a while the folks out of the recruit depot said, nah, we don't want to do that. And they said, well, why? They said, because you tell it too real. And they're not going to tell their kids, you should join the Marine Corps because you could get hurt. Well, hell yeah. So you think about Tarawa. Tarawa was the first full amphibious assault on a Japanese-held island, because at Guadalcanal, the Japanese were inland. So the vehicles didn't really get a baptism of fire. At Tarawa, that was going to change in a blink. Tarawa was located 1,300 miles northwest of American Samoa. It's a chain in the Gilbert chain. The Tarawa Atoll, the largest island, is called Betio, B-E-T-I-O. They pronounce S's as T's in Gilbertese. Now, on Betio, in an area no bigger than a parking lot around a football stadium, it was 2 miles long, 800 yards wide. That's still bigger than the square footage around a parking stadium around a football stadium. 5,000 Japanese defenders, 2,900 crew-served weapons. They were there for 5 years building that particular island up. The Marines brought in 15,000 Marines against 5,000 defenders. The commanding admiral for the Japanese, Admiral Shibasaki, had boasted that 1,000,000 men in 1,000 years will never take Tarawa. It was going to take the Marines 76 hours to take that island at an incredible cost. To understand Tarawa is to understand that on November the 20th, 1943, a Saturday morning, Marines are climbing down those wet nets, getting into those amphibious tractors, and getting ready to assault an island with 5,000 defenders who fought by the Bushido Code. Roughly translated, the most glorious thing a warrior can do is to die with the Emperor's name on his lips. 15,000 Marines were going to help those Japanese release as rapidly as possible. So as they moved in, before they even left the ship, so you could get a true perspective of what these men went through, remember their ages. 17, 18, 16, 15, they lied to get into the fray. Because on December the 8th, 1941, miles long at recruiting stations. And they were lying to get into the fray, as they called it. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're off of Betio, you're about to face 5,000 Japanese defenders, and you're sitting inside having breakfast on the mess decks, if you can eat. While you're eating, the chaplains are coming through giving mass last rites to everybody that's eating. I don't know about you, I go to Denny's, I don't expect to see somebody going on me down there and buy. But in this case here, they would not have time to do it as they died on the beach. The Marines understood, they accepted, forward. The Navy told them, this is a cakewalk. We've hit this place for 7 days. We've put 300 tons of munitions per square yard. Nothing survived that. What they didn't know was the Japanese had 15-foot thick bunkers. They had built the redoubts, or the facings on their bunkers at a slant, so that naval artillery shells hit them, skipped, went to the other side of the island. If you were to go to Basio today, which looks like a dead parakeet on its back, if you went to Basio, go to the other side of the island, you find thousands of naval rounds that just hit, skipped, bounced over the other side, and the Japanese waited. The front of the island was faced with a 600 to 800 yard coral reef on the 3 main landing beaches, read 1, 2, 3, right in the throat of the parakeet. 2,900 crew-served weapons, 10 yards of sand, 6-foot high seawall, 27 tractors, first wave, moving in. At 2,000 yards, they're taking fire, and they realize the Navy lied to them. There's people alive there, and they're pissed. And so they're taking fire from the Japanese at 2,000 yards, and as they hit the reef, the Japanese stopped firing. The reason the Japanese stopped firing was they knew that the tidal conditions were 18 inches on that reef at that time of day, and they assumed that these traditional landing craft would bottom out and they'd pick them off during noon chow. Much to their surprise, the boats with wheels, as they called them, they had never seen these in warfare. Boats with wheels hit the reef, churned through, dropped into the lagoon, and kept charging toward the beach. Whatever the term for "oh shit" is in Japanese, I know they uttered it, and they picked up fire, and they started pounding these guys. 12 tractors survived in the first wave, 15 destroyed before they got to the beach. Second wave's coming in, and as the second wave's coming in, it's the traditional Saving Private Ryan Higgins boats. For those who went to New Orleans and saw them down in the museum. The Higgins boats came in, they didn't have the draft. The Higgins boats hit the reef, bottomed out. The infantry then climbed out of those boats and waded 800 yards into full frontal fire. You gotta stop and think about that for a moment. And you wonder why I tell these stories? I've met these guys. They wandered, they waded ahead. Now, for most of us, our parents are from that generation, they rarely talked about the war. They either became deeply religious or deeply alcoholic. Because nobody would understand what these guys went through. And this is the part when I try to tell people, and the folks from MCRD go, don't do that. You go, no, you have to understand what that 18-year-old did. Fred's to the left, George is to the right. Bang, bang. These guys are dead, and you're still standing there. And you're going, why me? And if that's not bad enough, you take the body of Fred, and you put him in front of you. And you push Fred in to keep yourself alive. And you're hearing that sound. That's Fred keeping you alive. I will tell their story until the day I die here. Okay. Second wave, the guys are wading in. The surviving tractors. On the first wave, they tried to climb that 6-foot wall. Japanese guns are from me to Tom right here, 10 yards, fully depressed. Blowing the crap out of these tractors. None of them could get over the top of the wall. Those tractors that were still running went into the water, started pulling Marines that were wading in, throwing them into the tractors, dragging them up to the beach. It's only 2 miles by 800 yards. And the Japanese are willing to die. We had never met a defender like that. Now, by nightfall, 1,500 Marines are stuffed underneath that wall. There's nowhere to go. So they move yard by yard as the sun comes up. And it took them 76 hours of what Colonel Joseph Alexander wrote in his book called Utmost Savagery, the 76 hours of Tarawa. They fought with guns, knives, flamethrowers, rocks, whatever they had. It was utmost savagery. End of 76 hours, of the 5,000 Japanese defenders, 17 survived. The Marines lost 1,000 killed, 6,000 wounded in an area no bigger than a football stadium, but they secured the island. Of the 125 amphibious tractors used at Tarawa, 105 were destroyed or disabled. 20 survived. The mortality rate for these guys and these tractors was 75%, their average age 18 years old. Their reward for that was 4 months later to go to Kwajalein and keep that island hopping campaign going. So what we've endeavored to do in here is to tell that story of how the tractors were developed and how they were utilized. And as you go through and you look, they were designing these things as they learned lessons. Once the Japanese figured out that these things carried troops, their defensive posture was to concentrate machine gun and mortar fire right there, because if the vehicles survived the run to the beach, the infantry had to climb over the sides, which exposed them to direct fire from the Japanese defenders. So they designed the vehicle down the end there, the A1. And the A1 was basically the same hull as this, with a Sheridan turret, a 50 cal, In the turret, a 37 millimeter cannon and two 30s on either side. Its job was to lay down suppressive fire. It would accompany the troop-carrying LVTs on the flanks. And suppressive fire is a Marine Corps euphemism for making the other guy duck, just keeping his head down. So when these vehicles touched down, the guys had a chance to survive. The next vehicle perpendicular to the door is the LVT-4. It's the largest of the World War II tractors, and on that vehicle it could carry 25 troops inside, a small Jeep, a couple of pack howitzers, so it was a workhorse. They built over 8,000 of those during World War II. And its claim to fame was it was the first one with a rear ramp, and the infantry thought that's a real good deal. Because now we have a chance to survive, we get out of the back without exposing ourselves. Now, what you're seeing inside the museum, everything that's in here is donated by veterans who took these vehicles ashore or rode in them. And you'll see things in here that are personal artifacts of Marines, of Japanese. This is our latest edition. Again, it's called the Cup of Coffee concept. We received a donation of a Nambu machine gun and a Japanese uniform. And we thought, well, we could put it up on a display somewhere. And then over that cup of coffee, we went, well, hell, why don't we build a pillbox? Oh, okay, good idea. No plans, no nothing. We just, oh, by the way, if you ever want plans for a Japanese pillbox, go on the internet, they're there. We found plans on how to build a Japanese pillbox. So more coffee, a chainsaw, we built it. And that's exactly what a pillbox looks like on one of those islands. Because the Japanese built things indigenous, with indigenous materials. Because they were as isolated as anybody, so they built them out of palm logs, coral. If they could make some concrete, good deal. They dug holes in rocks. I have had the privilege of being able to walk on some of these islands as one of my other lives that I do too. I'm a professor of education at San Diego State University too. And I go down to Micronesia to teach classes once in a while. Good deal number 27, that allows me to walk some of these battlefields. So I've been to Peleliu, and Peleliu in particular is a very interesting spot to go to. You get inside a Japanese gun emplacement, you look out on the beach and you just shake your head. You go, my God, how did they survive that? How did they manage to do that? And they kept on doing it. So as you go around, that vehicle over in the corner is probably unique. It's kind of, I can use this term with our age group, it's the Edsel of Amtrak's. If you remember the Edsel from Ford, okay? In the fall of 1945, after they had been hopping from one end of the Pacific up to the other, they were preparing to invade the Japanese home islands. It was called Operation Olympus. And one of the interesting anecdotes in history that a lot of people aren't really aware of is that that's the first time that the United States military came very close to having a mutiny on its hands. And the reason it was almost a mutiny, there was two opposing forces. It was going to take 1 million men to invade the Japanese home islands. 1 million was the planned landing operation. I know in this day of trillion-dollar budgets, $1 million doesn't seem like a lot. 1 million men. Marine Corps was only 800,000 large in World War II. So they were going to grab the other 200,000 from the Army. And the Army absolutely gave them the #1 indicator, saying not only no, but hell no. We went to Europe, we fought from Normandy to Berlin, and the Germans at least had the good sense when they were getting their butts whipped to say, we quit, let's have a beer. The Japanese, on the other hand, are willing to die. That's a tough son of a gun to fight. And the Army wanted no part of that. So they were openly rebelling against President Truman's order to move them and train for the operation that was going to invade Japan. The other problem was the Marine Corps, who had fought again from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, was getting ready to move into these Japanese home islands, and they estimated that the Japanese would have somewhere around 3 million casualties. It's just numbers, right? 3 million. The Commandant of the Marine Corps took the President of the United States along his starboard side and said, you might want to rethink that. We have come from Guadalcanal to Okinawa. We have experienced brutality of one human being against the other that you can't even imagine. And I can assure you that when we cut my Marines loose on the Japanese home islands, they will kill every single thing. They're going to invent a new term. It's called payback. You don't see it in history books because, of course, history is written by the winners. And then again, the light of history is kind of bent through the prism of time. So I tell this story to people that come through here so that they can understand, because particularly the youngsters, when they go, do you mean the United States of America actually dropped an atomic bomb on innocent civilians? Oh, hell yes, we did. Not one, but two. And if we had a notion, we would have probably dropped three, but that would have been probably the last one in our arsenal. We didn't want to let the Japanese know that. Truman had to make a decision, and it was a very tough decision. Do I take out a city, and it has turned out to be 2 cities, or do I allow the Marines to go in there and absolutely savage that land? And the Marine Corps was chomping at the bit, but at the same time, they were hoping that they didn't have to go in. And so Truman made a decision. They lit them up. The Japanese didn't buy that first one. 3 days later, they lit them up again at Nagasaki, and the Japanese went, "We're done." And every Marine got down and kissed the ground. Because as I've met these men and I've talked with them, they've said, you know, there's been certain events in my life that are very, very significant. The birth of my first child and the dropping of the bomb. I was scheduled to go into Japan. Had I gone in, the birth of my first child might not have occurred. You'll get no argument from any man that was getting ready to go into Japan as to whether we did a moral right thing. So I try to put that to the youngsters that come through here. Don't let the time change what we did. It was a necessary evil. It was warfare. The rules of engagement were not CNN covered. That being said, that vehicle was designed specifically to go into Japan. It's the only one that has 2 engines in it. It's got an engine in each sponsor, a Cadillac V8 of the era. Large, vulnerable target when it broke down. What happened was they designed that so that they had redundant systems. That was the vehicle, they built 4,000 of them, specifically to go into Japan. 2 engines, 2 drivetrains. If it broke down, they could still keep on moving. With the dropping of the bombs, they didn't use it, and so they covered it because they wanted to give the troops some protection from nuclear fallout, and that was the plan because they thought World War III was going to be an atomic war. So they built a cover over the top of the vehicle. The next time it was used was at Incheon in the Korean conflict. So that is our vehicle. That is the story that I give our young Marines. And I generally, our age group, we could probably do that. You're more than welcome to climb inside these vehicles. I know I can make that offer without worrying about it, except for the youngsters over there. Oh, hell yeah, I'm good to go. But I have my Marines come in and listen to the ghosts. I have them climb inside of it. I have them walk through them. I look through the gun ports. Go enjoy yourselves. We got some more time, and when we're done, we'll all get together. So please, go see that, guys.